subscriber milestone video, but it is a 1 hour long video, one we haven't done in a very long time. It seems we only do them for milestones and special occasions, so we can just call it that, because I hadn't really planned on doing a milestone video, but I will take this intro to just say thank you so much for 5,000 subscribers. To a lot of people that might not seem like a big number, but to me that is just, I think it's just crazy, to be honest. And we've hit that in a very short space of time. When I came back to the channel and, changed it all up, that was in like November of 2020. So we've been going a year and a few months, and when I came back to the channel we were on 800 subscribers, so we've gained over 4,000 subscribers in just over a year. I think is insane. So thank you everyone, whether you like, comment, or even if you just subscribed and you watch the videos, thank you so much. And here's to the next 5,000. I would love to hit 10,000 by the end of the year, but I think that's going to be a little bit of a stretch, but that's the aim anyway. So anyways, enough rambling. Today I have for you 1 hour of ear-to-ear whispered facts about history. I skimmed these and there are some really fun ones, so I reckon without further ado, let's get into them. During World War II, a Great Dane dog named Juliana was awarded the Blue Cross Medal. She extinguished an incendiary bomb by being on it. Alexander the Great was accidentally buried alive. Scientists believe Alexander suffered from a neurological disorder called Guillain-Barré syndrome. They believe that when he died, he was actually just paralysed, but he was mentally aware. That is horrific. There were actually female gladiators in ancient Rome. A female gladiator was called a gladiatrix. They were extremely rare, unlike their male counterparts. The world's most successful pirate in history was a lady named Qing Shi. She was a prostitute in China until the commander of the Red Flag Fleet bought and married her, but her husband considered her his equal, and she became an active pirate commander in the fleet. You may know them as the bunch of heroes that broke box office records with their movies, but the Avengers was also a group of Jewish assassins who hunted Nazi war criminals after World War II. In total, they poisoned 2,283 German prisoners of war. From 1912 to 1948, the Olympic Games held competitions in the fine arts. Medals were given for literature, architecture, sculpture, painting, and music. Obviously, the art created was required to be Olympic themed. I can't imagine that would be very interesting to watch on TV nowadays. Famous conqueror Napoleon Bonaparte was once attacked by a horde of bunnies. He had requested that a rabbit hunt be arranged for himself and his men. When the rabbits were released from their cages, the bunnies charged towards Bonaparte and his men in an unstoppable onslaught. That would be pretty terrifying, actually. I'm actually allergic to rabbits, so that would be even worse for me. Cleopatra wasn't actually Egyptian. As far as historians can tell, Egypt's famous femme fatale was actually Greek. She was a descendant of Alexander the Great's Macedonian general Ptolemy. Ketchup was sold in the 1830s as medicine. In 1834, it was sold as a cure for an upset stomach by a higher physician named John Cook. It wasn't popularised as a condiment until the late 19th century. Did you know Abraham Lincoln is in the Wrestling Hall of Fame? The 6'4" president had one loss among his around 300 contests. He earned a reputation for this in New Salem, Illinois, as an elite fighter. To be honest, if he was wrestling while he was president, I assume his opponents just didn't want to beat up the president, right? So George Washington opened a whiskey distillery after his presidency. After his term, Washington opened a whiskey distillery. By 1799, this distillery was the largest in the country, producing 11,000 gallons of unaged whiskey. During the Salem witch trials, the accused witches weren't actually burnt at the stake. The majority were jailed and some were hanged, but none of the 2,000 people accused ever burned alive. Interesting. President Zachary Taylor died from a cherry overdose. He passed away after eating way too many cherries and drinking milk at a 4th of July party in 1850. He died from gastroenteritis. The acid in cherries, along with the milk, is believed to have caused this. Wow. That's like when you drink lemonade and eat a banana, doesn't that make you be sick? It's not really the same thing, is it? But whatever. Andrew Jackson had a pet parrot, and he taught his parrot, Polly, to curse like a sailor. There is even one legend that the parrot had to be taken out of Jackson's funeral for its proclivity for profanity. The Bloody Mary wasn't always called Bloody Mary. First, the popular brunch drink was actually called a bucket of blood. After bucket of blood, it transitioned to red snapper, and finally settled on Bloody Mary. In the ancient Olympics, athletes performed naked. This was to achieve closeness to the gods and also help detox their skin through sweating. In fact, the word gymnastics comes from the ancient Greek words gymnasia and gymnos meaning naked. In 1386, a pig was executed in France. In the Middle Ages, a pig attacked a child who went to die later from the wounds. The pig was arrested, kept in prison, and then sent to court where it stood trial for murder, was found guilty, and then executed by hanging. Oh gosh. Nobody could save his bacon. I'll move on. During the Great Depression, people made clothes out of food sacks. People used flour bags, potato sacks, and anything made out of burlap. Because of this trend, food distributors started to make their sacks more colourful to help people remain a little bit fashionable. That's nice. During the Victorian period, it was normal to photograph loved ones after they died. People would dress their newly deceased relatives in their best clothing and then put them in lifelike poses and photograph them. They did this to preserve one last image of their dead loved one. But why? What is the point? Surely you'd have photos of them from when they were alive. That's just really weird. The shortest war in history lasted 38 minutes. It was between Britain and Zanzibar, and known as the Anglo-Zanzibar War. This war occurred on August 27th, 1896. It was over the ascension of the next Sultan in Zanzibar, and resulted in a British victory. Tug of war used to be an Olympic sport. It was part of the Olympic schedule between 1900 and 1920, and occurred at 5 different Summer Olympic Games. The nation to win the most medals in this was Britain, with 5 medals. USA with 3. The University of Oxford is older than the Aztec Empire. The University of Oxford first opened its doors to students all the way back in 1096. By comparison, the Aztec Empire is said to have originated with the founding of the city of Tenochtitlan at Lake Toxico by the Mexica, which occurred in the year 1325. The most famous female serial killer was a Hungarian countess, Elizabeth Bathory de Exed. She was accused of torturing and killing over 650 young women. Most of them were between the ages of 10 and 14. That's horrible. Russia actually ran out of vodka celebrating the end of World War II. When the Long War ended, street parties engulfed the Soviet Union, lasting for days, until all of the nation's vodka reserves ran out a mere 22 hours after the partying started. It really just doesn't surprise me at all. The first official medals of honor were awarded during the American Civil War. They were awarded to Union soldiers who participated in the Great Locomotive Chase of 1862. In 18th century England, pineapples were a status symbol. Those rich enough to own a pineapple would carry them around to signify their personal wealth and high-class status. In that day and age, everything from clothing to houseware was decorated with the tropical fruit. That's so weird. In ancient Greece, they believed redheads became vampires after death. This was partly because red-headed people are very pale-skinned and sensitive to sunlight, unlike the Mediterranean Greeks who had olive skin and dark features. Ferrets, dogs, and monkeys were the most popular pets in the Roman Empire. Instead of cats, ancient Romans used ferrets to hunt mice and rats. They used dogs as guards and monkeys as entertainment. Tablecloths were originally designed to be used as one big communal napkin. When they were first invented, guests were meant to wipe off their hands and faces on a tablecloth after a messy dinner party. That's actually a really good idea. I back that. Before alarm clocks and way before smartphone alarms, there were people called knocker-uppers who would literally knock on people's window to wake them up in time for work. Up until the 1970s, knocker-uppers used a long stick, soft hammers, rattles, or even pea shooters to reach their clients' windows. British poet and politician Lord Byron kept a pet bear in his dormitory while studying at Cambridge. Known for being an avid animal lover, when he found out he couldn't bring his dog, he decided to bring a tame bear to live with him on campus instead. He was even known to take it on walks with a leash. Standard. For over 30 years, Canada and Denmark have been playfully fighting for control of a tiny island near Greenland called Hans Island. Once in a while, when officials from each country visit, they leave a bottle of their country's liquor as a power move. As St. Lawrence was roasted on a gridiron by the prefect of Rome during the persecution of Christians, legend says he cheerfully declared, "I'm well done on this side, turn me over." Because of this, he derives his patronage of cooks, chefs, and comedians. That's jokes, literally getting roasted alive, and your last line is a joke. What a beast. In 1998, 1,200 bones from some 10 human bodies were found in the basement of Ben Franklin's house. Before you go crafting a murder mystery about the founding father, it was revealed that the bodies were used in the study of human anatomy. Swan's baby was £22. In 1945, a balloon bomb launched by Japan landed in Oregon. It fell upon by a woman and 5 children who died when it exploded. These were the only World War II casualties on US soil. Roman gladiators often became celebrities and even endorsed products. Children would even play with gladiator action figures made out of clay. Also, their sweat was considered an aphrodisiac, and women would mix it into their skincare products. That's disgusting. Shame on you. Johnny Appleseed was a real person. His real name was John Chapman, and his hometown was Leominster, Massachusetts. Cars weren't invented in the United States. The first car actually was created in the 19th century when European engineers Carl Benz and Emil Levasseur were working on automobile inventions. Benz patented the first automobile in 1886. Abraham Lincoln was also a licensed bartender. In 1833, the 16th president opened up a bar called Berry and Lincoln with his friend William Berry in New Salem, Illinois. The shop was eventually closed when Berry, a raging alcoholic, consumed most of the shop's supply. That's a bit of a problem. This next section is titled Weird History Facts, beginning with Vladimir Pravik was one of the first firefighters to reach the Chernobyl nuclear power plant on April 26, 1986. The radiation was so strong that it changed his eye colour from brown to blue. Like the majority of the first responders to the radioactive disaster, Vladimir died 15 days later from severe radiation poisoning. Roman Catholics in Bavaria founded a secret society in 1740 called the Order of the Pug. New members had to wear dog collars and scratch at the door to get in. This paramasonic society was reportedly active until 1902. King Henry VIII of England had servants who were called grooms of stool, whose job it was to wipe his bottom after he went to the toilet. During his reign, he had all of those 4 such people knighted, deservedly so. 14 years before the infamous Titanic sank, author Morgan Robertson wrote the novella Futility. It was about the large unsinkable ship Titan hitting an iceberg in the northern Atlantic. What's even weirder is the Titanic and the fictional Titan did not have enough lifeboats for the thousands of passengers on board. Sounds a little bit like a conspiracy theory. That's really interesting. Between the 11th and 19th centuries, a number of Buddhist monks successfully mummified themselves. They adopted a practice called Soku Shinbutsu, in which they gradually weaned themselves off food and water and essentially starved themselves to death over the course of 1,000 days. It was believed that by successfully mummifying themselves, the monks would achieve true enlightenment. Whatever floats your boat, I guess. The ancient Romans often used stale urine as mouthwash. Nice. The main ingredient in urine is ammonia, which acts as a powerful cleaning agent. Urine became so in demand that Romans who traded in it actually had to pay tax. Trading in piss. What a career, eh? While in power, Pope Gregory, I'm not sure what number that is, maybe 10 or 11, declared that cats were to be associated with devil worship and had them exterminated. I can't help but agree with that. I hate cats. Some believe that the disappearance of those cats helped rats spread the bubonic plague, aka the Black Death, that killed millions of people shot, stabbed numerous times before he was finally drowned in the Volga River. Yeah, that ought to do it. From the 1940s to the 70s, Yale plus other Ivy League schools like Harvard, Vassar and Brown required their freshmen to pose nude for a photo shoot. The goal was to gather material for a massive study into how rickets developed, and that involved sticking pins to the back of the subjects, male and female. Generations of the country's elite who went to the Ivy Leagues posed, and the archives included the naked photos of well-known figures ranging from George W. Bush, Hillary Clinton and even Meryl Streep. The photos were destroyed after news leaked and the study was denounced. The Luftwaffe had a master interrogator, Hans Scharf, whose tactic was being as nice as possible. Scharf's best tactics for getting information out of prisoners included nature walks without guards present, baking them homemade food, cracking jokes, drinking beers, and afternoon tea with German fighter aces. His techniques were so successful that the US military later incorporated his methods into their own interrogation schools. In ancient Asia, death by elephant was a popular form of execution. They would be taught to slowly break bones, crush skulls, twist off limbs, or even execute people using large blades fitted to their tusks. In some parts of Asia, this method of execution was still popular up to the late 19th century. Gosh, that is a horrific way to go. Using forks used to be seen as sacrilegious. The widely used eating utensils were once seen as blasphemous and an offence to God. Why? Well, because they were artificial hands, and as such were considered to be sacrilegious. There we go. Mary, indeed, had a little lamb. Her name was Mary Sawyer. She was an 11-year-old girl and lived in Boston, and one day was followed to school by her pet lamb. In the late 1860s, she helped raise money for an old church by selling wool from said lamb. Back in the 16th century, the wealthy elite used to eat dead bodies. It was rumoured that cadavers could cure diseases. The highest delicacy was Egyptian mummies. Winston Churchill typically smoked 8 to 10 cigars a day, sometimes as much as 15. During the American Prohibition, he would get a doctor's note saying he needed to drink indefinite amounts of alcohol when he would come and visit the States. 100 million years ago, the Sahara Desert was inhabited by galloping crocodiles. Back then, the Sahara Desert was a lush oasis full of life and full of predators. In 2009, fossil hunters found the remains of crocodiles that had large land-going legs that were capable of galloping across the land at breakneck speeds. Before the 19th century, dentures were made from dead soldiers' teeth. After the Battle of Waterloo, dentists ran to the battlefield to seek out teeth from the thousands of dead soldiers. They then took their bounty to their dental practices and crafted them into dentures for the toothless elite. Roman Emperor Gaius, also known as Caligula, made one of his favourite horses a senator. The emperor loved his horse, named Incitatus, so much that he gave him a marble stall, an ivory manger, a jewelled collar, and even a house. Caligula also allegedly planned to make his trusty steed consul before his assassination. Sure, we've all heard of the Boston Tea Party, but what about the Boston Molasses disaster? On the 15th of January 1919, a 90-foot wide cast iron tank filled to the brim with sticky molasses exploded and spilled 2.5 million gallons of crude molasses molasses into the streets of Boston. The brown stuff ran through the streets like a tsunami, with 15-foot high waves and reaching speeds of 35 miles per hour. The molasses demolished everything in its path, toppling buildings, drowning horses, and eventually killed 21 people and injured a further 150. In 1644, English statesman Oliver Cromwell banned the eating of pie. He declared it a pagan form of pleasure. For 16 years, pie eating and making went underground until the Restoration leaders lifted the ban on pie in 1660. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, founding fathers and the second and third presidents of the US, respectively, died within hours of each other on 4th of July 1826, the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. Adams's last words were, "Jefferson lives," unaware that his old friend had died earlier that day. Joan of Arc convinced Charles she could lead his armies with no experience. She routed the English, survived a 60-foot escape leap from a tower uninjured, was falsely accused of heresy, and burned at the stake, all between the ages of 17 and 19. She was guided by voices only she could hear. The sound made by the Krakatoa volcanic eruption in 1883 was so loud that it ruptured eardrums of people 40 miles away. Travelled around the world 4 times and was clearly heard 3,000 miles away. That's like standing in New York and hearing a sound from San Francisco. That's ridiculous. The South African Railway once employed a baboon. In his right years of service, he never made a single mistake. The Tale of Two Lovers, an erotic novel, was one of the best-selling books of the 15th century. It was written by Pope Pius II before he assumed the papacy. It's believed that roughly 97% of history has been lost over time. Written accounts of history only started roughly 6,000 years ago, and modern humans first appeared around 200,000 years ago. Before Julius Caesar invaded Britain, many Romans didn't believe it existed. Julius Caesar was the first ever Roman to invade Britain. He did it twice in the years 55 and 54 BC. Some Romans believed Britain to be just the foot of another huge northern continent. Others thought it was a place full of unbelievable riches, whilst most thought it just didn't exist. The Soviet Union tried to snuff out the memory of Genghis Khan. During the Soviet-era rule of the late 20th century, simply mentioning the great Mongolian conqueror's name was a crime against the USSR. The Soviets removed his story from school textbooks and outlawed pilgrimage to his birthplace of Genti. The guillotine was invented to create equality in execution. Until its advent and widespread use, the regular methods of execution in France were rather savage. Punishment, like being drawn and quartered, was common. The idea to use the guillotine as the main method of execution was part of the movement for equality in France that spurred on the revolution. That's a topic I want to cover in an ASMR history video. Adolf Hitler helped design the Volkswagen Beetle. Between Hitler and Ferdinand Porsche, the iconic bug-like car was designed as part of a Hitler-revived German initiative to create an affordable and practical car that everyone could own. The ancient Egyptians used slabs of stone as pillows. In ancient Egypt, the head was considered to be the seat of spiritual life and had to be cared for. So, therefore, when getting into bed, the Egyptians would place their heads on a stone with a curve in it. first known artworks date back to roughly 100,000 years ago. It is believed to have begun with the Homo sapiens during the Upper Paleolithic era. The oldest known artworks were found in a cave in what is now France. By the way, if you hear creaking, it's my brother upstairs. I've told him to stop moving about. It's literally half 12. Like, it's just ridiculous. I can't film. How late does he want me to film? Honestly. Anyways, moving on. During World War II, Americans called hamburgers Liberty Steaks. This was because hamburger sounded a little too German. Also during World War II, sauerkraut was redubbed Liberty Cabbage. The Dutch Scilly War lasted 335 years and had no battles or deaths. Spanning between 1651 and 1986, the war was a byproduct of the English Civil War and the decision of the Dutch to side with the parliamentarians over the Royalists. The Royalists had raided a few Dutch shipping vessels in revenge before fleeing to the Isles of Scilly. The Dutch turned up, demanding reparations from the Royalists, and when they didn't pay up, declared war. But they decided to call it a day and go home pretty sharpish, as they realised the Royalists didn't have a penny to their names. The only thing is, they never declared peace with the Isles and just completely forgot they were at war. Adolf Hitler's nephew fought against the Nazis in World War II. During the Second World War, William Patrick Hitler was drafted into the US Navy, where he served as a hospital corpsman through the war until 1947. Corpsman, not corpsman. He was wounded in action and was awarded the Purple Heart and went on to gain American citizenship. The fastest surgeon ever ended up causing a 300% mortality rate. Shocking, right? Surgeon Robert Liston was considered the fastest knife in the West. He was a pioneer in speed surgery. Well, I'd argue if he caused a 300% mortality rate, he's not really like a pioneer, is he? But anyways. When performing a battlefield amputation in front of a group of spectators, Liston cut through his patient's legs so quickly that he accidentally cut the fingers of the person who was helping him. One man who witnessed the surgery collapsed and died of a heart attack. Then Liston's patient and his assistant died of blood poisoning from their joint amputation, making him the only surgeon in history to have a 300% mortality rate. Oh, I see. Okay. That's just terrible, really, isn't it? There were dance marathons during the Great Depression. These human endurance contests served as a way of giving financially unstable married couples a roof over their head and food to eat for a few days. The dance partners would take turns sleeping while the other propped them up and continued dancing with them. 1 in 200 men are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. The Mongolian emperor was known for siring at least 11 children. Scientists conducted a study in 2003 which showed that 1 in 200 men share a Y chromosome with the conqueror. In the Victorian era, men with moustaches used special cups, pragmatically called moustache cups. These specially made mugs had guards in them which prevented a man's moustache from dipping into their warm cup of tea. And this next section is titled Random History Facts. So, 46 BC was 445 days long and is the longest year in human history. Nicknamed the Year of Confusion, this year had 2 extra leap months inserted by Julius Caesar. This was in order to make his newly formed Julian calendar match up with the seasonal year. Back in colonial America, slaves could win their freedom through lawsuits. Although there was a low chance of succeeding, winning in court meant that the slave was now a citizen. Since slaves often didn't have last names and needed last name to be a citizen. They were often just given the last name of freeman. The Leaning Tower of Pisa was never straight. Known for its 4-degree lean, this Italian bell tower was constructed in the 12th century. When construction on the second story started, the tower started to lean due to the unstable ground it was built on. Iceland has the world's oldest parliament in history. Called the Althing, it was established in 930 and has stayed as the acting parliament of Iceland since then. Alexander the Great named over 70 cities after himself. He conquered over 2 million square miles of the Earth's surface, all by the time he was 30, so naming cities after himself was much deserved. Cleopatra was the first member of her dynasty to speak ancient Egyptian. She was also able to speak 8 other languages, including ancient Greek, ancient Iranian, ancient Parthian, Syriac, Ethiopian, Troglodyte, Hebrew and Arabic. America's National School Lunch Program of 1946 was due to World War II. This is due to the fact that the government realised by giving the children free meals, they would have a healthier draft ball if they ever needed it again. Paul Tibbets, pilot of the Enola Gay, the plane that dropped the first nuclear bomb on Hiroshima, didn't have a funeral or headstone. When he was close to death, Tibbets decided he didn't want a funeral or a headstone, as he worried it would become a place for protesting nuclear armament. Instead, he was cremated and his ashes were scattered over the English Channel. In medieval England, the word ask was pronounced axe. This pronunciation of the word was even featured in the first English translation of the Bible, axe and it shall be given. In 1710, Native American leaders travelled to Britain to visit Queen Anne. The 4 Mohawk kings from one of the Iroquois Confederacy's 5 nations and the Algonquian peoples were treated with high honour as diplomats. Transported through the streets of London in royal carriages, they were personally met by the Queen herself at the court of St James's Palace. The 7.62mm rifle bullet was created 129 years ago. The AK-47 ammunition was developed by the Russian Empire in 1891. Originally designed for the Mosin Nagant bolt-action rifle, this ammunition is still in use today. Shakespeare originated the Yo Mama joke. In his play Titus Andronicus, one of the characters, Chiron, exclaims, "Thou hast undone our mother," to which another character, Aaron, replies, "Villain, I have done thy mother." Nice. Hollywood moved from New York to Los Angeles to escape Edison's patents. Thomas Edison had patents on over 1,000 different things, including most of the technology needed to make movies. So, independent filmmakers moved to California, to an area of the country where the judges weren't as friendly to Edison and his patents. Charles Darwin invented his own wheeled office chair. The famous researcher found that in his study area, he would have to go through the rigmarole of walking about the office from bench to bench, desk to desk. So to maximise his productivity and save him some valuable study time, he decided to attach wheels to his luxurious armchair. The Circus Maximum in Rome is still the largest capacity sports arena ever built. It was used for the execution of prisoners, part of the Roman triumph and charity racing. Historians believe the Circus Maximum could hold between 150,000 to 250,000 people at any given time. Spartans were so rich that nobody had to work. Ancient Sparta was an immensely wealthy country, mainly due to their conquest and domination of their neighbours, the Helots. When a Spartan boy reached adulthood and became a man, the Spartan state awarded him with an allotment of public farmland. They also rewarded him with a constituent of Helot slaves to work it. That's the life, eh? Ancient Egyptian pharaohs used their slaves as flycatchers. They would lather their slaves in honey, which would attract any flies to their slaves rather than themselves, as well as trapping and killing flies. By the way, I said that's the life to the last pact, not about having the slaves, just that by becoming an adult you get given a load of land. Obviously, not a fan of slavery. During a Roman triumph, soldiers sang lewd songs about their commanders to amuse the crowds. A Roman triumph was kind of like a parade where a Roman general and his army would march through the streets, celebrating that they conquered new territory for Rome. There were many celebratory customs that occurred during a triumph, one of which was for the returning Roman soldiers to sing crude and banter-like chants about their commanders to the amusements of the crowd. Despite the legend, George Washington didn't have wooden teeth. The first American president had luxury dentures that were made of gold, lead and ivory, as well as being a mixture of animal and human teeth. The term saved by the bell does not originate from people being buried alive. Because of bells attached to coffins back in the day, people wrongly assume that the term saved by the bell comes from people being saved by these coffin bells. However, the term actually comes from boxing. One man survived both the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and then later Nagasaki. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was a 29-year-old naval engineer on a 3-month business trip to Hiroshima. He survived the atomic bomb on August 6, 1945, despite being less than 2 miles away from Ground Zero. On August 7th, he boarded a train back to his hometown of Nagasaki. On August 9th, while being with colleagues at an office building, another blue boom split the sound barrier. A flash of white light filled the sky. Yamaguchi emerged from the wreckage with only minor injuries on top of his current injuries. He'd survived 2 nuclear blasts in 2 days. I mean, you can look at it 2 ways, this fact. One, he's the most unlucky human to have ever existed, being the victim of 2 nuclear bombs. Or, if you're a glass half full kind of person, he survived 2 nuclear bombs in 2 days, which, you know, most people can't say they survived one, so. Since the end of World War I, over 1,000 people have died from leftover unexploded bombs. During the Great War, an estimated 200 pounds of explosives were fired per square foot of territory on the Western Front. However, not all of these shells exploded, and since 1919, over 1,000 civilians and ordnance collectors have died from explosions caused by these in France and Belgium. Albert Einstein turned down the presidency of Israel. Einstein wasn't a citizen of Israel, however he was Jewish. The German-born physicist was offered the post but turned it down in 1952, saying, "I am deeply moved by the offer from our state of Israel, and at once saddened and ashamed that I cannot accept it. All my life I have dealt with objective matters, hence I lack both the natural aptitude and the experience to deal properly with people and to exercise official functions." Thomas Edison didn't invent most of the stuff he patented. It's fair to say that Edison was one of the world's most notorious intellectual property thieves. Of the 1,093 things he put a patent on, he stole most of them off geniuses like Nikola Tesla, Wilhelm Röntgen and Joseph Swan, who actually originally invented the light bulb. So basically Edison's a fraud. Genghis Khan was tolerant of all religions. One of his interests in learning philosophical and moral lessons from other religions, despite being a missionaries and Taoist monks. Captain Morgan was a real person. The face of the much-loved Rembrandt was a Welsh privateer who fought against the Spanish alongside the English in the Caribbean. His full name was Sir Henry Morgan and was knighted by King Charles II. Turkeys were once worshipped as gods. The Mayan people believed turkeys were the vessels of the gods and honoured them with worship. Fox tossing was once a popular sport, popular with Europe's elite during the 17th and 18th centuries. Fox tossing would involve a person throwing a fox as far and as high as they could. I mean, that's just horrible as well. The saying, "fly off the handle," originates from the 1800s. It's a saying that refers to cheap axes flying off their handles when swung backward before a chop. 4% of the Normandy beaches are made up of shrapnel from the D-Day landings. More than 5,000 tons of bombs were dropped by the Allies on the Axis powers as part of the prelude to the Normandy landings. Scientists who have studied the sand on the beaches of Normandy, and they found microscopic bits of smoothed down shrapnel from the landings. A Japanese fighter pilot once dropped wreaths over the ocean to commemorate the dead from both sides during World War II, during a sea battle in the Pacific Ocean during December 1940. Two Royal Navy ships, the HMS Prince of Wales and the HMS Repulse, were sunk by Japanese fighters. The following day, Japanese Flight Lieutenant Haruki Iki flew to the location of the battle and dropped 2 wreaths over the seas. An ancient text called the Voynich manuscript still baffles scientists. Handwritten in an unknown language, the Voynich manuscript has been carbon dated to roughly 1404 to 1438. Hundreds of cryptographers and master code breakers have tried to decipher it over the years, with none succeeding to grasp its meaning or origin. The Eastern Roman Empire's weapon called Greek fire was used in ship-mounted flamethrowers. This weapon was so unique and deadly due to the fact that throwing water onto it would only feed the fire. It was mostly used in naval warfare, as the large flamethrowers needed for its projectile use could be better accommodated by ships rather than infantry. During World War I, the French built a fake Paris, complete with a duplicate Champs-Élysées and Gardenoux. This fake Paris was built by the French towards the end of World War I. It was built as a means of throwing off German bomber and fighter pilots flying over French skies. Since 1945, all British tanks are equipped with tea-making facilities. Having 30 tanks destroyed by the Germans while English soldiers were taking a 15-minute tea break, British High Command realised if tank crews could make a brew on the go, then they wouldn't be susceptible to being caught with their pants down and their kettles out by the enemy. That's good. A good brew solves everything. Shrapnel is named after its inventor. British Army officer Henry Shrapnel was the first person to invent an anti-personnel shell that could transport a large number of bullets to its target before releasing them. Cleopatra's reign was closer to the moon landings than the Great Pyramid being built. The Egyptian royal reign from 51 BC to 30 BC, roughly 2,500 years after the Great Pyramid of Giza was built, and roughly 2,000 years before the first lunar landings in 1969. In ancient Greece, wearing skirts was manly. In fact, Greeks viewed trousers as effeminate and would mock any men who wore them. The UK government collected postcards as intelligence for the D-Day landings. This was an intelligence initiated by Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan. He was searching for the hardest beaches to defend. The postcards were sent to the War Office and helped form part of the decision to choose Normandy as the location of the eventual D-Day landings. The Vikings were the first people to discover America. Half a millennium before Christopher Columbus, Viking chief Leif Erikson of Greenland landed on the island of Newfoundland in the year 1000 AD. The Vikings under Leif Erikson settled Newfoundland, as well as discovering and settling Labrador further north in Canada. The Colosseum was originally clad entirely in marble. When you visit or see the Colosseum these days, you'll notice how the stone exterior appears to be covered in pockmarks all across its surface. The reason for the pockmarks is after the fall of Rome, the city was looted and pillaged by the Goths. They took all of the marble from the Colosseum and stripped it down to its bare stone setting. Raided by the Goths, but they stole all the cancer monster as well. Augustus Caesar was the wealthiest man to ever live in history. Nephew and heir of Julius Caesar, Emperor Augustus had an estimated net worth of 0.46 trillion when counting for inflation. Only 6 people died in the Great Fire of London. The Great Fire of 1666 apparently traced its way to a baker's oven and caused massive damage across the city of London. However, despite destroying over 13,000 houses and displacing 80,000 people, it only claimed the lives of 6 unlucky Londoners. Count Dracula was inspired by a real person. The titular count was based on none other than history's own Vlad the Impaler. As the monarch of Wallachia, a Romanian region of Transylvania, Vlad soon made a fearsome reputation for himself by killing and impaling the still twitching bodies of his enemies on long sticks, which he planted outside his castle. What a nice Donny. The World War II Army of the US is the biggest army in history, due in part to the surge of American patriotism and because of conscription. The US Army numbered 12 million soldiers by the end of the war in 1945. Moving on. Onto a second thing now. So I'm hoping that there's not a lot of repeats, although the first 4 have all been repeats. Here we go. Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times. Julius Caesar is probably the most iconic name associated with the Romans. Likewise, his assassination and death are also highly notorious, due to his coup d'etat of the Roman Republic and his proclamation of himself as dictator for life. Along with his radical political views, a group of his fellow Roman senators, led by his best friend Brutus, assassinated him in 44 BC. During the assassination, Caesar was stabbed at least 23 times before finally succumbing to his wounds. He passed away with fabled words to his former best friend Brutus, allegedly being, "You do, sweet child." Okay. The Colosseum was named the Colosseum because it was next to a statue called the Colossus. It was originally known as the Amphitheatrum Flavium, or Flavian Amphitheatre, as it was constructed during the Flavian dynasty. Residents of Rome nicknamed it the Colosseo. This was due to the fact that it was built next to a 164-foot statue of Emperor Nero, known as the Colossus of Nero. Moving on. Wow, there's so many repeats. I'm wondering if this if they've just they've definitely got, one's definitely copied from the other. When Marcus Crassus died, molten gold was poured down his throat. Marcus Licinius Crassus was known as the wealthiest man in Rome during his life. The son of a consul of Rome, Crassus fought in Sulla's civil war, played a key part in defeating Spartacus and ending the Servile War, and formed the first triumvirate with Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. A shrewd man, throughout all he did, Crassus accumulated more and more wealth, and it was his thirst for wealth that would eventually lead to his downfall. Leading his troops in an ill-fated conquest of Parthia, Crassus and his forces were brutalized and bested by the Parthians time and time again. After an unsuccessful parley for peace with the Parthian leaders, Crassus was killed. The Parthians poured molten gold down his throat as a symbol of his thirst for wealth. Some even say that his gilded head and hands were sent to the Parthian king to keep as trophies of his victory against Crassus and Rome. Germany uncovers 2,000 tons of unexploded bombs every year. A singing birthday card has more computer power in it than the entire Allied army of World War II. I bet Hitler, Churchill, Stalin and Roosevelt would have killed to get their hands on one of those cards. The computer chip within them was so powerful by comparison that it would be inconceivable to the leaders of that time how we simply throw them away. I've switched websites now because there were just so many repeats. This fact states Paul Revere never actually shouted the British are coming. While everyone knows the story of Revere's famous ride in which he was said to have warned colonial militia of the approaching enemy by yelling, "The British are coming," this is actually false. According to History.com, the operation was meant to be quiet and stealthy since British troops were hiding out in the Massachusetts countryside. Also, colonial Americans still considered themselves to be British. One time, 100 impostors claimed to be Marie Antoinette's dead son. After the French Revolution, 8-year-old Louis was imprisoned and never seen in public ever again. His parents were executed in 1793, and afterward he was horrifically abused, neglected, and left isolated in a prison cell in the Paris Temple. In 1795, he died of tuberculosis at just 10 years old. His body was buried in secret in a mass grave. Years later, dozens of men came forward claiming to be him because a Bourbon restoration was a possibility, and a successful claimant could then potentially find himself on the throne of France. Right. Women were once banned from smoking in public. In 1908, New Yorker Katie Mulcahy was arrested for striking a match against a wall and lighting a cigarette with it. This was a violation of the Sullivan Ordinance, a city law banning women and only women from smoking in public. Mulcahy argued about her rights to smoke cigarettes in public. She was fined $5. 2 weeks later, the Sullivan Ordinance was vetoed by New York City Mayor. The government literally poisoned alcohol during Prohibition. During Prohibition in the United States, the US government literally poisoned alcohol. When people continued to consume it despite its banning, law officials got frustrated and decided to try a different kind of deterrent: death. They ordered the poisoning of industrial alcohols manufactured in the US, which were products regularly stolen by bootleggers. By the end of Prohibition in 1933, the federal poisoning program is estimated to have killed at least 10,000 people. That's just a little bit extreme if you ask me. The Titanic's owners never said the ship was unsinkable. Despite what James Cameron's iconic 1997 film may have you believe, the owners never said that it could never sink. Historian Richard Howells said that the population as a whole were unlikely to have thought of the Titanic as a unique, unsinkable ship before its maiden voyage. There were more than 600 plots to kill Fidel Castro. The Cuban dictator was targeted to be killed by a large range of foes, including political opponents, criminals, and even the United States, among others. Tactics included everything from an exploding cigar to a poisoned diving suit. Richard Nixon was a great musician. The 37th President of the United States actually was an extremely talented musician. He played 5 instruments in total. He played the piano, the saxophone, the clarinet, the accordion, and the violin. Lyndon B. Johnson gave interviews from the bathroom. This, for lack of a better word, unapologetic president gave interviews while using the toilet. Presidential biographer Doris Goodwin describes the impetus. He just didn't want the conversation to stop. Fair enough. July 4th, for Americans, isn't the real Independence Day. It is actually July 2nd, because this is when the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia actually voted to approve a resolution of independence. July 4th, though, is when Congress adopted the official Declaration of Independence, and most didn't even sign that until August. A lot of these are about American presidents. Betsy Ross didn't design and sew the first American flag. At least the only proof we have of this is from Ross's grandson William Canby, who claimed in 1870 that his Gam-Gam had the idea. The real creator was more likely to be Francis Hopkinson from New Jersey, who signed the Declaration of Independence and also designed many seals for the US government. We're going to end with some slightly quicker ones. Some 20,000 Confederates fled to Brazil after the Civil War to create a kingdom built on slavery. Adolf Hitler and much of Germany relied on opioids and meth to fight World War II. One loyal dog returned to the same train station for a decade as he waited for his deceased owner to return. That's just ruined my evening. Fantastic. Great. America's first black postwoman, Stagecoach Mary, was among the most intimidating figures in the Wild West. Italian doctors invented a fake disease to save Jews from the Holocaust. The US veteran who saved President Gerald Ford from assassination was cruelly outed by the media. An all-black regiment called the Harlem Hellfighters fought for longer than any other unit in World War I. And finally, King Leopold II of Belgium may be a worse mass murderer than Hitler. Under Leopold's rule, native people living in the Congo Free State suffered mass mutilations and death as the Belgians treated the entire region like their own rubber plantation. Ultimately, Leopold is thought to be responsible for some 10 million deaths. So, a nice light-hearted fact to end on. But I really hope you did enjoy this video, everybody. Again, apologies if it's a bit choppy and there's creaking and stuff going on, but it's literally 1 o'clock in the morning. When else am I meant to film? I have work tomorrow. I physically can't film any later, but thankfully my brother, I think, has actually decided to go to sleep. I did text him telling him to shut up, and he said he was sorting his wardrobe at 12 o'clock, but whatever. I really hope you did enjoy this though, guys, and thank you so much again for 5,000 subscribers. If you did enjoy this video, please do leave a like, and if you're new here, consider subscribing. There are loads of playlists in the description if you did enjoy this video too. But until the next video,